AITA for walking out after my wife's family tried to control everything about our baby. I'm 34 and my wife, Claire, is 32. We've been together for 7 years and married for 4. For most of our relationship things were pretty calm and normal. Claire is kind, funny, and generally easygoing. The only real complication has always been her family. Claire is extremely close with them, especially her mother Diane and her older sister Rachel. I don't mean close in the normal we talk a lot way. I mean they're involved in every single decision Claire makes. At first I tried to respect that. Some families are just tight-knit. But over time it started to feel like our marriage had 4 extra people in it. If Claire and I had a disagreement about something small like where to spend the holidays or whether we should move apartments, suddenly Diane and Rachel would know about it within an hour. Then I'd start getting texts like, "Claire is very upset right now. You should really think about her feelings." Or Rachel would message me something passive-aggressive like, "Just remember you married into a family, not just Claire." It was annoying, but manageable. Everything changed when Claire got pregnant last year. When we found out, I was honestly the happiest I've ever been. We had been trying for a while, and were both excited to become parents. The problem was at the moment Claire told her family, it felt like the baby stopped being ours. It became their project. The first big moment was when we told everyone the baby's gender. We invited both sides of the family over for dinner and announced that we were having a girl. Everyone was excited, but Diane immediately started talking about names. Claire and I had already talked about this privately. If we had a daughter, we both liked the name Lena. It wasn't a family name or anything dramatic. We just liked it. When we mentioned it casually during dinner, Diane made a face. She said, "That's interesting." Then Rachel jumped in and said, "Why wouldn't you name her Margaret after Mom?" The room got awkward. Claire laughed it off at first and said we were still thinking about names, but after everyone left, Claire told me her mom was actually upset about the name situation. Apparently Diane had always assumed that if Claire had a daughter, she would name her Margaret. I said that was nice, but it should still be our decision. Claire agreed with me at the time. But over the next few weeks the pressure kept building. Diane would call Claire and say things like, "It would mean so much to me," or "Families pass names down. It's tradition." Then Rachel got involved and started texting Claire long messages about how important family heritage was. Eventually Claire came to me and asked if we could consider Margaret as the first name and Lena as the middle name. I said no, not aggressively, but firmly. We had already chosen Lena, and I didn't want to start our parenting journey by letting other people make decisions for us. Claire seemed disappointed but said she understood. Unfortunately, that was just the beginning. Once the pregnancy progressed, Diane and Rachel started involving themselves in every single detail. They had opinions on the nursery, the stroller we should buy, the hospital we should use, even what Claire should be eating. Diane would show up at our apartment unannounced with bags of baby clothes that she had picked out herself. Most of them were things Claire and I never would have chosen. When I gently suggested we wanted to pick some things ourselves, Diane said something that stuck with me. She said, "First-time parents don't know what they're doing. That's why you have family." Claire didn't push back much. That started to bother me. I understood she loved her family, but it felt like she wasn't setting any boundaries. The biggest conflict happened around the baby shower. Claire's sister Rachel insisted on planning it. That sounded nice at first, so we agreed, but Rachel didn't ask Claire what she wanted. She just started organizing everything with Diane. When Claire finally saw the guest list, it had almost 70 people on it. Most of them were Diane's friends. Claire was overwhelmed and told Rachel she wanted something smaller. Rachel got offended and said she had already planned everything. Then Diane called me. Not Claire. Me. She told me Claire was being ungrateful and that Rachel had spent a lot of time organizing the shower. I told Diane this wasn't about gratitude. It was about Claire feeling comfortable. Diane responded with, "Pregnancy hormones are making her emotional. You should help her calm down." That was the moment I realized they didn't see Claire as an adult making her own choices. They saw her as someone they could still control. The baby shower ended up happening anyway, and it was exactly what Claire didn't want: huge, loud, and full of people she barely knew. Claire looked exhausted the entire time, but she kept smiling for photos because she didn't want to upset anyone. After that day, I told Claire something honestly. I said, "I feel like your family is raising this baby, not us." She got quiet. Then she said, "They're just excited." I said excitement shouldn't mean taking over. The final breaking point happened about a month ago. Claire was 7 months pregnant at the time. Diane came over for dinner and brought Rachel with her. At first everything seemed normal. Then Diane started talking about after the baby's born. She casually mentioned that she planned to stay with us for a few weeks to help. I was surprised because Claire and I had never talked about that. I said we appreciated the offer, but we were planning to figure things out ourselves first. Diane looked at Claire and said, "You'll need me," Rachel added. "Every new mother does." I said we'd still prefer some privacy at the beginning. That's when the conversation turned into a full argument. Diane accused me of trying to separate Claire from her family. Rachel said I was being controlling. I told them the opposite was true. I said I felt like they were trying to control our child before she was even born. Claire started crying during the argument, which made everything worse. Diane said I was stressing Claire out and harming the baby. At that point I was completely overwhelmed. I grabbed my jacket and said I needed to get some air. I ended up leaving the apartment and driving around for hours. When I got back later that night, Claire was still upset. She said my reaction made things worse and that I should have just let the conversation go. I told her I felt completely pushed out of decisions about my own child. She said her family was just trying to help. Now things between us are tense. Claire's family thinks I'm being unreasonable and dramatic. Claire says she understands my frustration but wishes I had handled things differently. Part of me wonders if I overreacted by walking out like that. But another part of me feels like if I don't stand my ground now, this will never stop. Our daughter will be born in about 2 months, and instead of being excited, I'm worried about what kind of dynamic we're bringing her into. So now I'm asking AITA for walking out after my wife's family kept trying to control everything about our baby. My name is Daniel, and my ex-wife is Sophie. We were together for almost 9 years and married for 6. For most of that time, I honestly believed we had a strong relationship. We weren't rich or flashy, but I thought we had something solid and real. We met when we were both in our early 20s. Sophie was the kind of person who lit up a room. She was outgoing, social, and always had energy. I was more quiet and focused on my long-term goals. That difference actually worked well for us in the beginning. She pushed me to go out more, meet people, and enjoy life. I gave her stability and someone she could rely on. Back then neither of us had much money. We lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment with thin walls and old appliances. The couch we had was something we bought second-hand from a neighbor who was moving out, but we didn't mind. Some of my favorite memories are from those early years ordering cheap pizza, watching movies on a small TV, and talking about what our future would look like. I always had a very clear goal for my career. I worked in IT support at the time, which paid the bills, but didn't offer much room to grow. My plan was to move into cybersecurity or network engineering eventually. To do that, I spent a lot of my evenings studying for certifications. That meant long nights and a lot of focus on work. Sophie used to encourage me. She would say things like, "Someday all this studying is going to pay off." Or she'd joke and say she couldn't wait until I was the rich tech guy and we could travel everywhere. But over time I started noticing subtle changes. She began complaining that I was always busy. She said we didn't go out as much as other couples and that our life felt routine. I tried to explain that this phase was temporary. I was building something that would benefit both of us later. At the time, she said she understood. Things shifted more dramatically when Sophie got a new job on a marketing company. Her previous job had been pretty quiet, but this new office had a much younger and more social environment. Her co-workers went out for drinks constantly, happy hours, birthday parties, weekend club nights. At first I thought it was great for her. She was making friends and seemed happier, but gradually, those outings started happening more and more often. At the beginning it was once a week, then twice, then sometimes 3 times a week. She'd come home late, sometimes after midnight, occasionally closer to 2 a.m. I trusted her completely at the time. I didn't question it, but little things started bothering me. She became more protective of her phone. She started turning it face down on the table or taking it with her everywhere, even when she went to the bathroom. If I asked about her night, the answers became shorter. Just drinks with co-workers, just a team event, nothing interesting. One night she came home smelling like alcohol and a strong cologne that definitely wasn't mine. When I asked about it, she laughed and said someone probably hugged her goodbye. I wanted to believe her, so I dropped it, but the feeling in the back of my mind didn't go away. About 6 months later, everything fell apart. One afternoon I got a message on social media from someone I didn't recognize. It was a guy who worked at the same marketing company as Sophie. His message started with, "Hey man, I'm sorry to send this, but I think you deserve to know." My stomach dropped immediately. He sent screenshots of messages between Sophie and another co-worker named Lucas. The messages were clearly romantic and sexual. There was no ambiguity about it. What hurt even more was the timeline. The messages went back 5 months, which meant that while she was coming home and telling me she loved me, she had already been seeing someone else. When Sophie came home that evening, I confronted her. At first, she denied everything. She said the screenshots were fake or taken out of context. But when I showed her more of them, the denial stopped. She started crying and admitted she had been seeing Lucas. According to her, it started as flirting at work and slowly turned into something more. She said she felt lonely because I was always busy studying or working. She sighed Lucas made her feel exciting and appreciated. That explanation felt like a punch in the face. Everything I had been working for was meant to build a better life for both of us. And she used that effort as the reason she cheated. I asked her the question that mattered most. Do you love him? She didn't answer right away. That silence told me enough. Within a few weeks we separated, and eventually the divorce process started. Those months were some of the darkest of my life, not just because of the betrayal, but because I kept replaying everything in my head. I wondered what I could have done differently, but eventually something shifted in me. Instead of focusing on what I lost, I started focusing on improving my own life. I finished the certifications I had been studying for. About a year after the divorce, I landed a job at a cybersecurity firm that paid more than double my previous salary. It felt surreal. For the first time in years, I wasn't constantly stressed about money. At the same time, I started working out. At first it was just a way to release frustration, but I quickly got into the routine. I lost weight, built muscle, and started feeling confident again. Over about 2 years, my entire life looked different. I moved into a better apartment. I traveled more. I made new friends. I even started dating casually. Again. During that time I heard occasional updates about Sophie through mutual friends. Her relationship with Lucas apparently didn't last long. From what people said, he lost interest once the excitement faded. They broke up within a few months. She ended up single again and eventually moved into a smaller place. I didn't feel happy about it, but I also didn't feel much sympathy. Actions have consequences. Then, about 3 months ago, Sophie messaged me out of nowhere. It was the first time we had spoken in almost 2 years. Her message said she had been thinking about me a lot and wanted to talk. Curiosity got the better of me, so I agreed to meet her for coffee. When I saw her, She looked nervous. Almost immediately she started apologizing. She said cheating was the biggest mistake of her life. She said she had been immature and selfish. She told me that after everything ended with Lucas, she spent a lot of time reflecting on what she lost. At one point she said something that stuck with me. I didn't realize how stable and safe my life was until I destroyed it. Then she asked if there was any chance we could try again. I was quiet for a while before answering. Then I asked her a question that had been bothering me. Would you be sitting here right now if my life hadn't improved? She looked down and didn't respond. That silence told me exactly what I needed to know. If I was still the struggling guy working long hours and living in the same small apartment, she probably wouldn't have reached out. I told her I wished her the best, but that I had moved on. Since then she sent several messages saying I'm being cold and unforgiving. Some mutual friends think I should consider giving her another chance because we spent nearly a decade together. But I keep thinking about those 5 months she lied to me while I was trying to build a future for us, and I can't shake the feeling that she only came back because things didn't work out the way she expected. So now I'm wondering, AITA for refusing to take my ex-wife back after she cheated and only wanted to reconnect once my life improved. My name is Adrian. I'm 33, and my sister Lily is 29. This whole situation started after our grandfather Walter passed away last year. To understand the problem, I need to explain the family dynamic first. Growing up, Lily was always the favorite child, not in a subtle way either. My parents, Karen and Michael, clearly treated her differently. Lily was the fun, outgoing one. She was the type who could charm people instantly. Teachers loved her, relatives adored her, and my parents constantly praised her. I was more quiet and responsible. If Lily got a B in school, my parents would say, "That's okay. She tried her best." If I got a B, the response was, "Why isn't this an A?" It wasn't something that ruined my childhood, but the difference in treatment was obvious. When we became adults, that pattern continued. I went to college for engineering, worked part-time to pay my expenses, and slowly built my career. It wasn't glamorous, but I was stable. Lily, on the other hand, changed directions constantly. She dropped out of college twice, started several small business ideas that never went anywhere, and moved apartments almost every year. My parents always helped her financially. They paid off one of her credit cards once, covered part of her rent during a difficult period, and even gave her money when one of her business ideas failed. Whenever I pointed out that they were constantly rescuing her, they'd say things like, "Lily just needs support while she finds her path." Meanwhile, I handled my own problems. The one person who seemed to notice this imbalance was our grandfather, Walter. Grandpa Walter was a quiet, observant man. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. When I was younger, he used to invite me over to help him with small projects around his house, fixing things in the garage, organizing tools, mowing the lawn. During those afternoons, we'd talk about life, work, and responsibility. He respected hard work more than anything. When I started my career, he often asked about my job and how things were going. I never expected anything from him financially, but we had a strong relationship. Lily rarely visited him unless it was during holidays. She wasn't rude to him, but she didn't spend much one-on-one time with him either. About 3 years ago, Grandpa Walter's health started declining. I began visiting him more often to help with groceries and small errands. Sometimes we'd just sit and talk for an hour. He never said anything about money or inheritance. Honestly, I didn't think about that at all. Then last year he passed away. It was sad, but he had lived a long life. A few weeks later, the family gathered at the lawyer's office to hear the details of the will. I assumed the inheritance would be split between my dad and my uncle, maybe with small amounts going to the grandchildren. But that's not what happened. According to the will, Grandpa Walter had left the majority of his savings and his house to me. It was a shock to everyone. including me. The house itself was modest but in a good neighborhood, and his savings were substantial enough to change my financial situation significantly. My dad and uncle received smaller portions, and Lily received nothing directly. The room went completely silent when the lawyer read that part. I remember looking at Lily and seeing the shock on her face. At first nobody said anything. Later that evening, my parents called me. They said Grandpa Walter probably made the decision because I had helped him more during his final years. Then my mom added something that made me uneasy. She said, "But of course you'll share some of it with Lily." I asked what she meant. She said it would only be fair for me to give Lily part of the inheritance since we're siblings. I told her I hadn't even processed the situation yet and needed time to think over. The next few weeks the pressure started building. Lily called me several times asking what I planned to do with the house and the money. At first she sounded curious, then the conversations became more pointed. She said things like, "It feels weird that you got everything," and "Grandpa probably didn't realize how unfair this would look." Eventually she asked directly if I planned to give her half. I told her honestly that I hadn't planned to split it like that. That's when things started getting tense. My parents began calling me more often, suggesting that the right thing would be to divide the inheritance between me and Lily. Their argument was that Grandpa probably just wanted to reward me for helping him, but he wouldn't have wanted the family to fight over it. But here's the thing, Grandpa Walter was extremely deliberate about everything. He wasn't the type of person who made careless decisions. If he wanted Lily to have part of the inheritance, he could have easily written that into the will. As the weeks passed, Lily's attitude changed from disappointed to angry. She started telling relatives that I was hoarding the inheritance. One cousin even messaged me asking why I was refusing to share. I was confused because I never said I wouldn't help Lily if she needed something, but giving away half of something that was specifically left to me felt wrong. The situation exploded about a month ago during a family dinner. My parents invited both of us over to talk things out. At first the conversation was calm. Then Lily said something that really bothered me. She said, "You only got that inheritance because Grandpa felt sorry for you." I asked what she meant. She said Grandpa probably thought I needed the money more because my life was boring and predictable. The room went quiet. I told her that was insulting and unfair. She responded by saying that siblings should support each other and that keeping everything was selfish. I finally said what had been building in my head for weeks. I said, "You've received financial help from Mom and Dad for years. Nobody ever asked you to share that with me." That made Lily furious. She said that was different because she had been struggling. I said that didn't change the fact that Grandpa made his decision. Now my parents are saying I'm tearing the family apart by refusing to compromise. Lily barely speaks to me anymore. Some relatives think I should just give her part of the inheritance to keep the peace, but part of me feels like doing that would ignore Grandpa Walter's final wishes. So now I'm wondering, AITA for refusing to give my sister part of the inheritance our grandfather specifically left to me. My name is Marcus. I'm 36 and my wife Emily is 34. We've been married for 5 years and together for almost 8. I love Emily deeply, but her mother Linda has been a constant source of stress in our relationship. When Emily and I first started dating, Linda seemed nice enough. She was friendly, talkative, and very involved in Emily's life. At first I thought she was just a caring parent, but after a while I started noticing that Linda didn't just care about Emily's life. She wanted to control it. For example, during the first year Emily and I were dating, Linda would call her multiple times a day. Sometimes it was small things like asking what Emily had for dinner or what she was doing that evening. Other times, it was more intrusive questions about our relationship. Did Marcus pay for dinner? Where are you two going this weekend? Do you really trust him? Emily used to laugh it off and say her mom was just protective. I tried to be understanding, because Emily was her only child, and I assumed things would calm down once Linda got used to me. They didn't. In fact, things got worse once Emily and I got engaged. The wedding planning process was the first major conflict. Emily and I wanted a relatively small wedding with close family and friends. Nothing to fancy, just something meaningful. Linda had a completely different vision. She started suggesting a huge venue, a massive guest list, and expensive decorations. Most of the people she wanted to invite were her own friends. When Emily tried to say she preferred something smaller, Linda would say things like, "Well, this is my daughter's wedding. Of course I want it to be special." Eventually Emily and I had to firmly tell her that we were making the final decisions. Linda didn't take that well. She didn't yell or make a dramatic scene. Instead, she became passive-aggressive. She'd make comments like, "I guess my opinion doesn't matter," or "Parents used to have more respect in family decisions." The wedding itself ended up being great, but the tension with Linda never really disappeared. After Emily and I got married, we bought a small house about 20 minutes away from Linda's place. At first I thought the distance might help create some boundaries. Instead, Linda started visiting constantly, and I mean constantly. She would show up without calling first. Sometimes she'd say she was just in the neighborhood, but it happened so often that it felt intentional. One Saturday morning, I was still in pajamas when she suddenly rang the doorbell at 8 a.m. When I opened the door, she walked right in like it was her own house and said she brought breakfast for Emily. That moment really bothered me. I told Emily later that I felt like we needed some boundaries about visits. Emily agreed in theory, but when she tried to bring it up with Linda, the conversation went poorly. Linda said things like, "Why would my daughter need boundaries with her own mother? And I'm not a stranger. I'm family." After that, Emily felt guilty and didn't push the topic again. Over the next couple of years, the pattern continued. Linda constantly gave her opinions about everything in our life. If we bought new furniture, she had opinions. If we planned a vacation, she had opinions. If Emily and I had even a small disagreement, somehow Linda would hear about it, and suddenly I'd get a lecture about how I should treat Emily better. The most frustrating part was that Emily didn't tell her these things directly. Linda just had a way of asking questions until Emily shared more than she probably intended. The biggest conflict started when Emily became pregnant last year. At first, everyone was excited. This was going to be our first child. But almost immediately Linda became extremely involved. She started talking about the baby like it was partly hers. She wanted to help decorate the nursery, choose baby clothes, and even attend some doctor appointments. Emily was overwhelmed, but didn't want to hurt her mom's feelings. I tried to stay patient, but it started feeling like Linda was inserting herself into every decision. The breaking point happened about 2 months before our baby was due. Emily and I had decided that after the birth we wanted a couple weeks of quiet time to adjust and bond with the baby. We planned to limit visitors at first. When Emily told Linda about this plan, Linda reacted very badly. She said it was ridiculous for a grandmother to be kept away from her grandchild. She even accused me of being the one who put the idea into Emily's head. According to her, I was trying to isolate Emily from her family. That accusation really upset me because it wasn't true. A few days later, Linda showed up at our house again without calling. I opened the door and she immediately started arguing about the baby situation. She said she had a right to be involved and that I was being controlling. At that point I had completely lost patience. I told her that this was our child and our home, and that she needed to respect our decisions. She kept arguing and raising her voice. Finally, I said something I had never said before. I told her she wasn't welcome in our house anymore until she could respect our boundaries. Linda looked shocked. She said I had no authority to ban her from her daughter's home, but I stood firm and asked her to leave. She eventually stormed out and called Emily, crying later that evening. Now the entire family knows About the argument, Linda has told several relatives that I'm controlling and disrespectful. Some of them believe her and think I overreacted. Emily is caught in the middle. She told me she understands why I was frustrated, but she also wishes the situation hadn't escalated that far. Our baby is due in a few weeks, and instead of being excited, everything feels tense. Part of me wonders if banning Linda from the house was too extreme, but another part of me feels like if I didn't draw a clear line, nothing would ever change. So now I'm wondering, AITA, for banning my mother-in-law from our house after years of her interfering in our relationship. My name is Ethan, and I'm 31 now. This story mostly involves my ex-girlfriend Vanessa, who I dated for almost 5 years when we were younger. Back when we met, we were both in college. Vanessa was studying business and marketing, while I was studying computer science. From the very beginning, Vanessa and I were very different people. She was extremely social. She loved parties, big friend groups, and going out almost every weekend. She was the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately start conversations with strangers like she'd known them for years. I was almost the complete opposite. I was quiet, introverted, and more focused on school and long-term goals. I enjoyed simple things, gaming with friends, working on coding projects, and staying in rather than going out. Honestly, when Vanessa first showed interest in me, I was surprised. She was beautiful, confident, and had a big personality. I always assumed she'd end up dating someone louder, richer, or more charismatic than me. But somehow we clicked. During college, our relationship was actually great. We helped each other study sometimes, stayed up late talking about our future, and supported each other through stressful exams and deadlines. I remember nights where we'd sit on the floor of my tiny dorm room eating cheap takeout and talking about what our lives would look like 10 years in the future. Vanessa used to talk about traveling the world and building a successful career in marketing. I talked about building software, working for a big tech company someday, and maybe starting my own business. Back then, we both believed we'd grow together. After we graduated, things started to shift. Vanessa got a job at a marketing agency that had a very social work culture. Her co-workers were all extremely outgoing people who dressed well, went to trendy bars, and seemed to live very glamorous lives. I got a junior developer position at a small tech company. It was a great opportunity, but the salary wasn't impressive at first. Most of the early years in tech involve a lot of learning, long hours, and building experience before you start making serious money. That didn't bother me. I knew it was part of the process, but Vanessa started noticing the difference between my lifestyle and the people she worked with. At first the comments were small. She'd tease me about my clothes and call my wardrobe very programmer. Or she'd say things like, "You should really upgrade your style." I didn't think much of it initially, but gradually the comments started feeling less like jokes and more like criticism. One night, we were getting ready to go to a party with her co-workers. I was wearing a clean button-down shirt, jeans, and sneakers. Nothing fancy, but perfectly normal. Vanessa looked at me and frowned. She said, "You're not wearing that, right?" I asked what was wrong with it. She sighed and said, "Everyone at this party dresses way better than that. I don't want people thinking my boyfriend doesn't care about his appearance." That moment stuck with me more than I expected. I ended up changing clothes just to avoid arguing, but something about the way she said it bothered me. Over time, these kinds of moments became more common. She started comparing me to the men she worked with. Some of them worked in finance or management roles and made more money than I did. She'd mention their expensive watches, their cars, or the places they went on vacation. At one point, she even said something like, "Sometimes I feel like we live in completely different worlds." I tried to remind her that I was still early in my career. I was working long hours and studying constantly to improve my skills. I was learning new programming languages and taking online courses at night, so I could eventually move into higher level roles. But to Vanessa, progress that wasn't immediately visible didn't seem to matter. About 4 years into our relationship, things started getting worse. Vanessa was moving up in her company and becoming more connected socially. She was attending networking events, parties, and work dinners regularly. Meanwhile, my life was pretty routine. Work, studying, coding projects, gym occasionally, sleep. One evening Vanessa asked if we could talk. I still remember sitting on the couch that night, feeling nervous without knowing why. She said she felt like she had outgrown the relationship. At first I didn't understand what she meant. Then she explained. She said she wanted a partner who matched her lifestyle more. Someone confident, stylish, ambitious, and successful. I asked if she thought I wasn't ambitious. She said something that hurt more than I expected. She said, "You have potential, but right now you're not there yet." That sentence stuck with me for a long time. A few weeks later, she broke up with me. Her explanation was that we were growing in different directions. At the time, it completely shattered my confidence. 5 years is a long time to build a life with someone. Suddenly everything felt empty. The hardest part was hearing through mutual friends that she started dating someone new not long after. His name was Trevor. Trevor worked in finance, made a lot of money, drove a luxury car, and posted photos from expensive restaurants and vacations all the time. Basically, he represented the lifestyle Vanessa had been talking about wanting. For a while, that comparison destroyed my self-esteem. I started wondering if Vanessa had been right about me. But eventually something changed. Instead of focusing on what I lost, I decided to focus on improving myself. I poured all my energy into my career. I spent extra time studying advanced programming concepts, improving my coding skills, and building projects that would help my resume. 2 years later, my hard work paid off. I landed a job at a much bigger tech company. The salary was almost 3 times what I had been making before. That moment felt surreal. For the first time in my life, I felt financially secure. I paid off my student loans. I moved into a nicer apartment. I started traveling occasionally. Around that same time, I also began focusing more on my physical health. I joined a gym mainly as a way to deal with stress, but I ended up getting really into it. Over the next year, I lost weight, gained muscle, and became much more confident in my appearance. I also started dressing better not because someone told me to, but because I finally felt comfortable investing in myself. Slowly, my life started looking completely different from the way it did during my relationship with Vanessa. I also started dating again casually, and something interesting happened. Women started noticing me more, not just because of the physical changes, but because my confidence had grown. For the first time in my life, I genuinely felt comfortable with who I was. Then, about 6 months ago, something unexpected happened. I received a message from Vanessa. It had been nearly 4 years since we last spoke. Her message was simple. She said she had been thinking about me and wondered how I was doing. At first I didn't respond, but curiosity eventually got the better of me. We started talking a little. She asked about my job, where I lived, what I had been doing over the years. When I told her about my career and the company I worked for, she seemed very impressed. Eventually, she suggested meeting for coffee to catch up. When we met in person, I could tell she was surprised. The first thing she said was, "You look completely different." We talked for almost 2 hours. During that conversation, I learned that things hadn't gone exactly the way she expected. Her relationship with Trevor had ended years earlier. Her career also hadn't progressed the way she hoped. Near the end of the conversation, she said something that changed the tone completely. She said, "I think I made a mistake letting you go." She talked about how mature and stable I seemed now. Then she asked if I would ever consider trying again. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Then I asked her something that had been sitting in my mind the entire time. I asked, "Would you have stayed with me if I looked like this and had this job back then?" She hesitated, and that hesitation answered the question for me. I told her politely that I had moved on. I said I wished her the best, but I wasn't interested in reopening that chapter of my life. She looked genuinely hurt and said people grow and deserve second chances. Some mutual friends have told me I should at least consider it, since we had such a long history together. But part of me feels like she only sees my value now that my life looks successful. Back when I was building myself up, she walked away. So now I'm wondering, AITA for refusing to give my ex another chance after she left me because she thought I wasn't good enough at the time. My name is Ryan. I'm 30 now, and my ex-girlfriend is Natalie, who is 30. We were together for almost 6 years. For most of that time I honestly believed we were in a loving relationship and that I was just doing what any supportive partner would do. Looking back now, I realize a lot of the things I thought were normal relationship struggles were actually manipulation. But when you're in the middle of it, especially when you care about someone deeply, it's very easy to ignore red flags. Natalie and I met at a small birthday party for a mutual friend. It wasn't a big event, maybe 10 people hanging out in someone's apartment. Natalie stood out immediately. She was extremely charismatic. She had this way of talking to people that made them feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. When we started talking, she asked me a lot of questions about my life, my hobbies, my job. I worked in project management for a mid-sized company at the time. Nothing glamorous, but stable. We ended up talking for almost 3 hours that night. By the time the party ended, it felt like we had known each other much longer than just a few hours. A few days later, she texted me, and we started going out regularly. The first few months of the relationship felt incredible. Natalie was affectionate, enthusiastic, and constantly telling me how lucky she felt to have met me. She said I was kind, patient, and different from the guys she had dated before. At the time, hearing those things made me feel really good about the relationship. But even early on, there were small things that I didn't question enough. For example, Natalie had a very intense emotional reaction to even the smallest disagreements. If I mentioned something that bothered me, even something minor, she would immediately become extremely upset. Instead of discussing the issue calmly, she'd say things like, "I guess I'm just a horrible girlfriend," or "I can't believe you think so little of me." Then she'd start crying. Suddenly the conversation wasn't about what I brought up anymore. It became about comforting her and reassuring her that she wasn't a bad person. I'd end up apologizing just to calm things down. At the time I thought she was just sensitive, but that pattern repeated over and over again. Another thing Natalie did frequently was disguise criticism as helpful advice. She'd comment on my clothes, my hobbies, even my personality. She'd say things like, "You're lucky I love you, because most women wouldn't date someone who dresses this casually," or "You're a great guy, but sometimes you're a little too soft." Whenever I reacted negatively, she'd say she was just trying to help me grow. Over time, those comments slowly chipped away at my confidence. I started second-guessing myself more often. Another thing that changed gradually was my social life. Before dating Natalie, I spent a lot of time with friends. We played basketball on weekends, went to movies, and occasionally traveled together. But Natalie didn't seem to like when I spent time away from her. If I told her I had plans with friends, she'd say she missed me and wished we had more time together. If I visited family, she'd say she felt like she wasn't a priority. She never outright told me not to go, but she made me feel guilty enough that I often cancelled plans. Over time I saw my friends less and less. Then came the financial situation. About a year into our relationship, Natalie lost her job. She said her manager treated her unfairly and forced her out. I believed her and felt bad for her. She told me she needed a few months to recover and find something better. I told her I'd support her while she figured things out. At the time it felt like the right thing to do, but those few months slowly stretched into something much longer. She went to some interviews, but nothing seemed to work out. Eventually her lease ended, and she suggested moving in with me temporarily to save money. I agreed. At first I assumed she'd find a new job within a few months, but months passed, and nothing changed. Meanwhile I was covering everything: rent, groceries, utilities, entertainment, Vacations. Every time I brought up finances, the same pattern happened. Natalie would say she felt terrible about not contributing. Then, she'd start crying and saying she felt like a burden. Then I'd end up apologizing for making her feel bad. It became a cycle. Eventually, I stopped bringing it up entirely, but internally, I was becoming more and more exhausted. I worked long hours to support both of us. Despite that, Natalie constantly complained that our lifestyle wasn't exciting enough. She said we should travel more. She wanted nicer furniture. She wanted more spontaneous romantic gestures. It always felt like whatever I did was never quite enough. The moment that changed everything happened about 8 months ago. One afternoon, I came home earlier than usual because a work meeting had been cancelled. When I walked into the apartment, Natalie was sitting on the couch talking on the phone. She didn't notice me because I had entered quietly. At first I didn't pay attention to the conversation, but then I heard my name. Natalie was talking to one of her friends, and what she said made my stomach drop. She laughed and said something like, "Ryan is so easy to control. If you cry a little, he'll do whatever you want." I froze. Then she kept talking. She said she didn't plan on getting a job anytime soon because I was already paying for everything. She even joked that she could probably convince me to buy her a new car if she pushed the right emotional buttons. Hearing that felt like the ground disappeared under me. 4 years I believed I was supporting someone I loved during a difficult time, but in that moment it sounded like she had been manipulating me the entire time. I quietly left the apartment and walked around the neighborhood for almost 2 hours trying to process what I had just heard. When I returned, Natalie acted completely normal. She hugged me and asked how my day was. For the first time in years, I didn't fall into the usual pattern. I told her I had heard her conversation earlier. Her reaction followed the exact pattern I should have expected. First she denied it, then she said I misunderstood, then she started crying and accusing me of spying on her. But something had shifted in my mind. For the first time, I saw the manipulation clearly. I told her I couldn't stay in a relationship where I felt used and manipulated. She tried everything, apologizing, promising to change, saying she would finally start looking for work. But once the illusion was broken, I couldn't ignore what I heard. A few days later, Natalie packed her things and moved out. Since then she has been telling mutual friends that I abandoned her while she was struggling financially. Some people believe her and think I was heartless. Others say I did the right thing. Part of me still struggles with guilt because -1 years is a long time to walk away from, but another part of me feels like I finally escaped a situation that was slowly draining me emotionally and financially. So now I'm wondering, AITA for leaving my girlfriend after realizing she had been manipulating me for years and using me for financial support. My name is Alex, I'm 30, and this situation involves my ex-girlfriend Maya, who is 28. We were together for a little over 3 years before everything exploded in a way I never imagined. To understand what happened, you need to know that Maya's entire life revolved around social media. When we first met, she was already building a following online. She created lifestyle content, things like daily routines, travel clips, relationship advice, and aesthetic photos. She wasn't a huge influencer with millions of followers, but she had around 80,000 followers across different platforms, which was enough that people recognized her online, and she earned some money from brand partnerships. At first I thought it was pretty cool. We met through mutual friends at a small house gathering. Maya was outgoing, funny, and very charismatic. She had a way of telling stories that made everyone around her laugh. We ended up talking for most of the night. She asked me about my job, my hobbies, my life growing up. I worked in marketing analytics for a mid-sized company. Nothing glamorous, but stable. A week later, we went on our first official date. The beginning of the relationship was honestly great. Maya was affectionate, energetic, and always coming up with fun plans. We went on weekend trips, tried new restaurants, and explored parts of the city neither of us had seen before. Very early in the relationship, she asked if I was comfortable being in her social media posts. I didn't really mind. At first it was just small things, pictures of us at dinner, short videos of us hiking, or funny couple moments. Her followers seemed to love it. People would comment things like "you two are adorable" or relationship goals. At the time it felt harmless and even kind of flattering. But over time I started noticing something about Maya. Everything in her life had the potential to become content. If we went out to eat, we couldn't touch the food until she took pictures. If we went somewhere beautiful, she'd spend 20 minutes setting up the perfect angle for a photo. If we went on vacation, entire sections of the trip were spent filming clips. At first I tried to be supportive, because it was part of her work. But after a while it started feeling like our real experiences were less important than how they looked online. There were moments where we would be having a perfectly normal evening, and suddenly she'd stop and say something like, "Wait, we should record this." Then she'd recreate the moment for the camera. It was strange, but I adjusted. The bigger issue started when she began posting things about our relationship that weren't entirely accurate. For example, if we had a minor disagreement, she'd sometimes post vague captions online like, "Sometimes the people closest to you hurt you the most," or "learning that not everyone deserves your loyalty." Her followers would immediately flood the comments with support. People would write things like, "Stay strong, Queen. You deserve so much better." The problem was that those posts often came after completely normal disagreements that most couples have. I brought it up once and told her it made me uncomfortable when our private issues turned into public posts. She told me I was overthinking it. She said she never mentioned my name, and that people were just projecting their own experiences. For a while, I tried to ignore it, but the pressure of constantly being part of her online image started affecting the relationship. Sometimes it felt like she cared more about how our relationship looked than how it actually felt. For example, we could have an argument in the morning, and then that same afternoon she'd post a smiling couple photo with a caption like, "Forever grateful for my person." The disconnect between reality and what she posted online started bothering me more and more. Still, things were mostly manageable until about 8 months ago. Around that time, I was working on a massive project at my job. It required a lot of overtime and long evenings at the office. For about 3 weeks I was coming home late, almost every day. Maya started complaining that I wasn't spending enough time with her. I understood why she felt that way, but I tried to explain that the project was temporary. Once it finished, things would go back to normal. One night we had a fairly serious argument about it. She said she felt like I was choosing work over our relationship. I said that wasn't true, but sometimes responsibilities take priority. The argument wasn't pleasant, but it also didn't feel like the end of the world. We went to bed annoyed with each other, but assumed we'd talk about it later. The next morning everything changed. I woke up to dozens of messages on my phone. At first I thought something terrible had happened to someone we knew, but when I opened the messages, they were all asking the same question: "Are you okay? What happened with you and Maya?" You need to see what she posted. Confused, I opened social media. Maya had posted a long emotional video. In the video, she talked about being in a toxic relationship for several years. She never said my name directly, but it was painfully obvious to anyone who knew us that she was talking about me. She described her boyfriend as someone who made her feel small, neglected her emotionally, and controlled parts of her life. She talked about crying alone at night and feeling trapped in the relationship. The video exploded. Within a few hours, it had hundreds of thousands of views. Thousands of comments flooded in supporting her. People were calling her brave for speaking out. The problem was that the story she told in the video barely resembled reality. Yes, we had arguments like any couple, but I had never controlled her, insulted her, or emotionally abused her. Suddenly thousands of strangers believed I was some kind of horrible partner. The worst part was how quickly it started affecting my real life. Friends were messaging me asking what happened. Some people believed the story immediately. Even a co-worker quietly asked me if everything was okay at home because they had seen the videos circulating. I felt embarrassed, angry, and honestly a little helpless. I called Maya immediately. She didn't answer. When she finally responded hours later, she said she was just expressing her feelings and never mentioned my name. I told her everyone knew she was talking about me. She said if people assumed that, it wasn't her responsibility. Over the next few days, the situation got even worse. Several large social media accounts shared her video. It spread even further. More strangers started messaging me insults. Some people called me abusive without knowing anything about me. At first, I stayed silent because I didn't want to escalate things publicly. But then Maya posted another video. In that one, she talked about finally leaving the relationship and choosing herself. The comments were full of people celebrating her for escaping a terrible boyfriend. That was the moment I realized something important. If I stayed silent, this version of the story would become the only version people ever heard. So I decided to respond. I wrote one long post explaining my side of the situation. I didn't insult Maya or attack her character. I simply explained what our relationship had actually been like, what the argument was about, and how surprised I was by the video. I also shared a few screenshots of conversations that showed our disagreements were much more normal than the way she described them online. The response was immediate. Some people appreciated hearing both sides. Others accused me of trying to silence her or manipulate the narrative. Maya was furious. She said I had humiliated her and betrayed her trust by sharing private messages. Now months have passed and the online drama has mostly faded, but the situation still bothers me. Some friends say I should have handled everything privately. Others say I had every right to defend myself. Part of me wonders if responding publicly only made the situation bigger. But another part of me feels like I had no choice. If someone publicly damages your reputation, staying silent can make it look like the accusations are true. So now I'm wondering, AITA, for publicly defending myself after my girlfriend's viral social media post made me look like a toxic partner. My name is Daniel, I'm 33, and until recently I was supposed to marry my fiancée Sophie, who is 31. We had been together for almost 5 years, and for most of that time I believed we had a solid relationship and the future together. But the closer we got to the wedding, the more things started to change. What began as normal wedding planning slowly turned into something stressful, uncomfortable, and eventually shocking enough that I called the entire wedding off just 1 week before the ceremony, and now a lot of people are divided about whether I overreacted. To start from the beginning, Sophie and I met at a trivia night at a local bar. A group of friends invited both of us separately, and we ended up on the same team. She was funny, competitive, and had this very confident personality that made conversations with her really easy. Throughout the night we kept joking with each other, and by the end of the game, we were mostly just talking instead of focusing on the questions. A few days later, she messaged me, and we went on our first date. The relationship grew pretty naturally after that. For the first couple of years, things were honestly great. We traveled together, met each other's families, and rarely had major arguments. Sophie worked in event planning, which meant she organized corporate events, parties, and sometimes weddings. I worked as an engineer, so my life was a lot more routine and structured. Because Sophie worked in the event industry, I assumed she'd be incredibly organized when it came to planning our future wedding. 3 years into the relationship, proposed during a weekend trip. She was incredibly excited and emotional, and I remember feeling like it was one of the happiest moments of my life. But almost immediately after the engagement, things started changing. At first it seemed normal. Sophie began talking about wedding ideas, venues, decorations, and themes. She was very enthusiastic about planning everything, but the process quickly stopped feeling like our wedding and started feeling like her project. Because she worked in events, she had extremely specific expectations. The venue couldn't just be nice, it had to be memorable. The decorations had to match a very detailed theme. The food had to be restaurant quality. At first I didn't mind. I figured weddings were a big deal, and it made sense, she cared about details. But the first real disagreement came when we discussed the guest list. I originally imagined a relatively small wedding, maybe 80 or 100 people. Just close family and friends. Sophie's version started at 150 people and quickly grew to over 250 guests. Many of these people were extended relatives, distant family friends, or co-workers I had never even met. When I suggested we keep things smaller, Sophie seemed surprised that I would even bring it up. She said weddings were supposed to be big celebrations. Her parents also got involved around that time. Her mother Linda and father Mark were very enthusiastic about the wedding, but their enthusiasm came with a lot of strong opinions. Linda especially treated the wedding was some kind of public event for the family. She constantly said things like, "People will remember this wedding for years," or "This is a chance for the whole family to celebrate properly." Every time I suggested simplifying something, Linda would say it would make the wedding feel cheap. Meanwhile, the budget kept growing. Originally, Sophie and I had discussed a wedding budget of around $25,000, but as more details were added, premium catering, a luxury venue, professional lighting, live music, elaborate decorations, the cost started climbing. Soon we were talking about $50,000, then closer to $60,000. This made me extremely uncomfortable. I had savings, but spending that much on a single day felt excessive to me. I asked Sophie if we could reconsider some of the expenses. She got frustrated and said I was focusing too much on money instead of celebrating our future together. Her parents also suggested that weddings were supposed to be expensive. The strange part was that while they had strong opinions about how extravagant everything should be, they weren't offering much financial help. Most of the costs were coming from my savings. Still, I tried to stay supportive. I told myself weddings were stressful and temporary. But about 2 months before the wedding, something happened that completely changed how I saw everything. One afternoon, Sophie left her laptop open on the kitchen table while she went to shower. I wasn't snooping, but when I walked by, I noticed an email thread with the subject line, "Updated Wedding Contribution Expectations." The title alone made me curious. When I opened it, what I saw made my stomach drop. The email was between Sophie, her mother Linda, and several relatives. Attached to the email was a spreadsheet listing guests and the expected value of the gifts they would bring. Not just general expectations, actual estimated amounts. For example, Daniel's co-workers, likely $300, $500 each. Uncle Robert usually gives generous gifts. Aunt Karen, probably $200 minimum. There were even notes suggesting which guests might need encouragement. The emails also discussed ways to subtly remind guests how expensive the wedding was, so they would feel pressured to give larger gifts. One suggestion from Linda said they should make a speech during the reception mentioning the cost of the wedding. Another suggested including a message in the invitations hinting that gifts should reflect the scale of the event. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It felt less like planning a celebration and more like planning a financial strategy. When Sophie came back, I asked her directly about the spreadsheet. At first, she tried to laugh it off. She said it was just something her family did to estimate gifts. But I told her it felt manipulative. Guests shouldn't feel like they're being evaluated based on how much money they give. The conversation quickly turned into a serious argument. She accused me of embarrassing her and criticizing her family traditions. I told her I didn't want our wedding to feel like people were being pressured for money. Eventually we stopped arguing and just avoided the topic. But something about the situation kept bothering me. Then about 3 weeks before the wedding, one of my groomsmen, Chris, called me. He sounded uncomfortable. He asked if everything was okay with the wedding plans. I said yes. Why? Chris then told me Sophie had privately contacted several members of the wedding party. She told them the wedding had become more expensive than expected. and suggested they consider increasing their wedding gifts. Hearing that made everything click. The spreadsheet wasn't just a private conversation. They were actively trying to pressure people for money. That night I confronted Sophie again. The argument was worse than anything we'd had before, she said. I was making a huge deal out of something normal. Her mother got involved and told me I clearly didn't understand how weddings worked. But at that moment I realized something important. This wedding had stopped being about our relationship. It had become some kind of public spectacle focused on money and appearances. For several days, I barely slept. I kept imagining what my future would look like if this was the dynamic I married into. Eventually, I made the hardest decision of my life. 1 week before the wedding, I told Sophie I couldn't go through with it. I cancelled the wedding. The reaction was explosive. Sophie was furious. Her parents accused me of humiliating their entire family. Many deposits were non-refundable, which made the situation even worse. Some friends think I overreacted and should have worked through the conflict. Others say the situation revealed serious red flags and that I avoided a much bigger mistake. Even now, months later, I still wonder if I did the right thing, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that marrying into that situation would have caused much bigger problems later. So now I'm wondering, AITA, for cancelling my wedding 1 week before the ceremony after discovering my fiancée and her family were planning to pressure guests for money. My name is Marcus, I'm 34, and my wife Elena is 32. We've been married for 4 years and together for almost 7. Until recently our relationship was pretty stable, and we rarely had major conflicts. But when Elena became pregnant with our first child, something that should have been one of the happiest times in our lives turned into a huge conflict between my wife and my family, especially my mother Diane. Now my family is divided, my wife is stressed, and I'm stuck in the middle, wondering if I handled everything the right way. To explain what happened, I need to start a little earlier. Elena and I met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. It was one of those casual restaurant gatherings where everyone brings a friend, so most people don't know everyone else there. Elena was sitting across from me at the table. She wasn't the loudest person there, but she had a calm, thoughtful personality that stood out. At one point someone made a joke about how chaotic the group was, and Elena quietly added something sarcastic that made half the table laugh. That's how we started talking. Over the next few months we went on several dates, and our relationship developed naturally. Elena worked as a graphic designer and had a very creative personality, while I worked in IT project management. We balanced each other well. After about 3 years of dating, we got married. During that time Elena met my family many times. My father Paul is a quiet, practical guy who usually avoids conflict. My mother Diane, on the other hand, has always been very involved in my life. Growing up, she was the type of parent who wanted to help with everything: school decisions, friendships, career advice, and even small everyday choices. When I was younger, I saw that as normal, but Elena noticed something early in our relationship that I hadn't fully realized. My mother had a habit of inserting herself into situations where she wasn't really needed. For example, when Elena and I moved into our first apartment together, my mother offered to help us unpack. At first we appreciated the help, but what was supposed to be a one-day visit turned into several visits every week. She started rearranging things in the apartment without asking. She would move furniture, reorganize the kitchen cabinets, and sometimes criticize our choices. Once she even said the couch we bought looked too cheap for a married couple. Elena tried to stay polite about it. Afterward she told me the situation made her uncomfortable because it felt like my mother was trying to take control of our space. At the time I told Elena that my mom just meant well, and for a while things stayed manageable. My parents lived about 30 minutes away, so we only saw them occasionally, usually for family dinners, holidays, or birthdays. Everything changed last year when Elena told me she was pregnant. I still remember the moment clearly. She came home from a doctor's appointment and sat next to me on the couch with a nervous smile. When she showed me the positive test, I felt a mix of excitement and panic, but mostly excitement. We had talked about having kids someday. So even though it was a little earlier than we expected, we were both happy. For the first few weeks we kept the news private. Then we decided to tell our families. We invited my parents over for dinner one weekend and told them the news after we finished eating. My father smiled and congratulated us. My mother, however, was absolutely thrilled. She jumped up, hugged Elena, and immediately started talking about baby clothes, nursery decorations, and family traditions. At first it was sweet. She said she had been waiting years to become a grandmother, but within a few weeks, her excitement started turning into something much more intense. My mother began calling Elena almost every day. Sometimes she would give advice about pregnancy diets. Other times she would send long lists of baby products she thought we should buy. She also started visiting our house more often. Sometimes she brought homemade meals for Elena, which we appreciated, but other times she showed up unexpectedly and started talking about how we should rearrange rooms to prepare for the baby. One afternoon, she even started measuring the spare bedroom. When Elena asked why, my mother said it could become her room when she stayed over to help with the baby. At the time, Elena and I thought she meant occasional overnight visits, but a few weeks later, we realized she had something much bigger in mind. During a family dinner, my mother casually said that once the baby was born, she planned to move into our house temporarily so she could help raise the baby. She said it like it had already been decided. Elena and I both looked shocked. I told my mom we appreciated the offer, but we hadn't planned on anyone living with us. My mother looked genuinely surprised. She said new parents always need help, and that having her there would make things much easier. Elena politely explained that we wanted to try handling things ourselves first. My mother didn't seem happy with that answer. Over the next several weeks the subject kept coming up again and again. Every time we saw my mother, she mentioned the idea of moving in. At first she said it would only be for a couple of weeks. Then she started saying maybe a few months. Eventually, she even joked about staying until the baby started preschool. Elena became increasingly uncomfortable. Pregnancy was already physically exhausting for her, and the idea of having someone constantly in the house made her anxious. One night, she told me something that really stuck with me. She said she was worried that if my mother moved in, she would feel like she was being judged as a parent every day. She said she wanted space to learn how to be a mother without someone constantly watching and correcting her. I completely understood that. So I tried explaining it to my mother. Unfortunately, that conversation didn't go well. My mother said she had raised 3 children and knew exactly what new parents needed. She said Elena was being overly sensitive and that she was only trying to help. When I told her we still wanted privacy in our home, she became upset. She said Elena was pushing her away from her own grandchild. Then she said something that really bothered me. She said I was choosing my wife over my own mother. For a while the situation stayed tense, but quiet. But then my mother decided to involve the rest of the family. Suddenly I started receiving calls from relatives. My aunt called to say my mother felt deeply hurt. My sister said letting her move in would make things easier for Elena during the first months after the baby was born. Even some cousins told me I should reconsider. Meanwhile, Elena was becoming more stressed. She was already dealing with the physical and emotional challenges of pregnancy, and now she felt like she had to constantly defend her boundaries. One night, she admitted she felt like the baby had become a family project instead of our child. That was when I realized the situation had gone too far. So I made a firm decision. I called my mother and told her that while we appreciated her willingness to help, she would not be moving into our house. I told her she was welcome to visit and support us, but our home needed to remain our private space. She reacted very badly. She accused Elena of manipulating me. She said I was disrespecting everything she had done for me growing up. Since then the situation has been very tense. My mother barely talks to me. Some relatives think I'm being selfish and ungrateful, But Elena feels relieved, but I supported her and protected our boundaries. The baby is due in a few months, and instead of enjoying this time peacefully, it feels like our entire family is divided. Part of me wonders if I should have compromised just to keep the peace, but another part of me believes letting my mother move in would have created even bigger problems later. So now I'm wondering, AITA for refusing to let my mother move into our house after my wife got pregnant, even though it caused a massive family conflict. My name is Ethan, I'm 35, and my wife Lena is 33. We've been married for 6 years and together for almost 9. I love my wife deeply, and for most of our relationship we've been happy. But there has always been one major source of tension in our marriage: her parents. Her mother Carol and father Richard have always been extremely involved in Lena's life. At first I thought it was just a close family relationship. Over time, however, their involvement slowly turned into constant interference in our home, our finances, and even the way we handled our relationship. Recently everything reached a breaking point, and I told them they were no longer welcome in our house until they learned to respect boundaries. Now most of Lena's extended family is angry at me, and some of them say I went too far, but at the same time, Lena admits their behavior has caused problems for years. To explain why I finally snapped, I need to go back to the beginning. Lena and I met at a game night hosted by one of our mutual friends. It was one of those casual gatherings where people bring snacks, play board games, and just hang out. Lena immediately stood out to me because she had this warm, easygoing personality. She laughed easily, and she had a sarcastic sense of humor that caught me off guard a few times during the games. By the end of the night, we were sitting on the couch, talking more to each other than paying attention to the game. We started dating shortly after that. Our relationship grew naturally over the next couple of years. Lena worked as a marketing coordinator, and I worked as a mechanical technician for a manufacturing company. Our lifestyles were pretty compatible. We both liked quiet weekends, occasional travel, and spending time with friends. Everything felt easy, but early in the relationship I noticed something interesting about Lena's family. She spoke to her mother Carol constantly, sometimes multiple times a day. If something happened at work, she called her mom. If she had a small problem, she called her mom. If she had to make a decision about anything, even something simple, she called her mom. At the time I thought it was just a close mother-daughter relationship, but after a while I started noticing another pattern. Whenever Lena talked to her mom about something, her mom would have very strong opinions about what Lena should do, and those opinions often influenced Lena's decisions. At first it wasn't a big deal, but later it became more noticeable. About 2 years into our relationship, I proposed to Lena. She happily said yes. That's when I really started seeing how controlling her mother could be. Once the wedding planning began, Carol wanted to be involved in everything. At first that seemed normal. Parents often help with weddings, but Carol didn't just help, she took over every decision. Lena and I made seemed to go through her mother first. The venue wasn't elegant enough. The decorations were too simple. The guest list was wrong. The cake flavor wasn't traditional. At one point Carol even told Lena that our wedding colors looked cheap. Lena tried to balance things by telling her mother we had already made certain decisions, but Carol kept pushing. Eventually the wedding planning felt less like Lena and I preparing for marriage and more like we were organizing Carol's dream wedding. Despite the stress, the wedding went well in the end, and I assumed things would calm down afterward. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. After the wedding, Lena and I bought a small house about 20 minutes away from her parents. At the time I thought that distance would help create healthy boundaries, but instead, Carol started visiting even more often. Sometimes she showed up with food or small gifts. Other times she came over just to check on us. At first I tried to be welcoming, but the visits rarely felt casual. Carol constantly commented on how we ran our house. She suggested rearranging furniture. She criticized how we organized the kitchen. She commented on the color of the curtains. Once she even said the couch we bought looked too small for a married couple. The strangest moment happened about 6 months after we moved in. Lena and I came home from work one day and found that the kitchen cabinets had been completely reorganized. All of the dishes, spices, and utensils were in different places. When we asked Carol about it later, she casually admitted she had stopped by earlier that day while we were at work. She had used the spare key Lena gave her for emergencies. She said she reorganized everything because she thought it would be more efficient. At the time I laughed it off, but inside I felt like something was wrong with that situation. Lena's father Richard was quieter than Carol, but he had his own way of interfering. Richard liked giving financial advice. Constantly. Whenever Lena and I made a financial decision, he had something to say about it. When we bought our house, he said we paid too much. When we bought a car, he said we should have chosen a different model. When Lena considered changing jobs, he told her she should choose the option that paid more, even though she cared more about work-life balance. Over time it felt like every major decision in our lives had to pass through her parents first. The longer we were married, the more obvious the problem became. Sometimes Lena would agree with me about something, then she would talk to her mother, and suddenly her opinion would completely change. For example, we once discussed renovating part of the basement into a home office. Lena liked the idea, but after talking to Carol, she suddenly thought it was a waste of money. This happened several times with different decisions. Eventually, I started feeling like our marriage had 4 people involved instead of 2. I talked to Lena about it multiple times. She admitted her parents could be pushy, but she said they meant well and were just trying to help. I tried to be patient, but things eventually reached another level. About a year ago, Lena and I started talking about the possibility of having kids. We weren't rushing into it, but we were thinking about the future. Apparently Lena mentioned this to her mother. Within days, Carol started bringing it up constantly. Every family dinner turned into a conversation about grandchildren. At first it was just jokes, but eventually it started feeling like pressure. Carol would say things like, "Don't wait too long," or "I can't wait to help raise my grandchildren." One night, she even said something that made both Lena and me uncomfortable. She said she hoped we had kids soon, so she could make sure they were raised properly. I laughed awkwardly at the time, assuming she was joking, but I started realizing she wasn't. The final straw happened about 2 months ago. Lena and I had gone away for a short weekend trip. When we came home Sunday evening, something immediately felt different in the house. The living room wrong. It took a moment to realize why. Several pieces of furniture had been moved. The couch was in a different position. The coffee table had been moved. Even some decorations were rearranged. At first I thought maybe Lena had done it before we left, but she looked just as confused as I was. Then we found a note on the kitchen counter. It was from Carol. She had used the spare key to come into our house while we were away. According to the note, she had rearranged several rooms to make the house more functional. I was furious. To me, that crossed a massive boundary. Someone entering our home without permission and rearranging everything felt incredibly disrespectful. When Lena called her mother, Carol acted like it was completely normal. She said she was just trying to help. She even said the house looked better now. That was the moment I realized something had to change. A few days later, Carol and Richard came over for dinner. I decided it was time to address the situation directly. I calmly explained that while we appreciated their support, certain boundaries needed to exist. I told them they couldn't come into our house without permission. I also asked for the spare key back. Carol reacted immediately. She said I was being rude and ungrateful. Richard said I was overreacting and that families should help each other. The conversation quickly turned into an argument. Carol accused me of trying to control Lena. Richard said I was disrespecting their role as parents. Eventually, I told them something I had been holding in for years. I said they were no longer welcome in our house unless they respected our boundaries. The room went completely silent. Carol looked shocked. Richard looked furious. They left shortly after that. since that night. Things have been extremely tense. Several members of Lena's extended family have called me. Some say I embarrassed her parents. Others say I should apologize and smooth things over. Lena understands why I was upset, but she also feels caught in the middle between me and her parents. Part of me wonders if I should have handled the situation more gently. But another part of me feels like if I hadn't finally set boundaries, the interference would have continued forever. So now I'm wondering, AITA, for banning my in-laws from our house after years of them interfering in our marriage and our home.